Welcome to Windows on the World, bringing you cutting-edge news, empowering information, and no conspiracy theories. On tonight's show. So, Kevin and Annett, welcome back to Windows on the World.
It's good to be here, Mark. Hi.
Well, we spoke about 6 or 7 weeks ago, and quite a lot of things have been happening. You've been pushing forward with the publicising of the Republic of Kanata. You've also got a radio show coming out, and you've recently written a book, or you've published a book recently. So you've been quite busy. So give us an update, Kevin. How's it going?
Well, it's going amazingly well. In terms of the Republic of Kanata, as people may or may not know, on January 15th, there was a lawful republic declared in Canada by over 1,000 people. There was a proclamation issued. This is posted up at itccs.org. And these are people who acted on the evidence we had surfaced over a number of years that the Crown of England is a criminal organization responsible for the mass murder of children, for the ongoing trafficking of children and their murder. And so under international law, we recognize that we're not obligated to pay taxes or to show allegiance to a criminal organization. And so on that basis, we declared the lawful republic. And what's interesting is that the response we've gotten, not only across the country, we literally can't keep up with the number of requests, how excited people are over this. I mean, the latest opinion poll in Canada had 62% of Canadians wanting to sever ties with the Crown. So, this is definitely, we have the majority here on our side, but we also have police coming to us, members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and others who recognize these facts and who are looking for some way to switch allegiances. I mean, this is a grassroots revolution happening as we watch. And it's probably one of the reasons we face so many attacks over the last few months, very organized, well-funded attacks over the internet. I think we recognize that, like with veterans of a war, you don't have to tell people who've been through a war what it's like. Similarly, people inside the system know the extent of the corruption and the violence. You don't have to convince them. They were, like many people, they're looking for an alternative. We're beginning to create that. So it's very, very exciting what's happening. We're launching a new blog radio program called Radio Free Kanata. People can access that Sundays starting March 1st. Unfortunately, it's at 11 p.m. Greenwich time, but there'll be a notice up about that very soon. And on your third point, this book I just published, it's called Samuel Wedge, Memoir of Necropolis. It's a fictionalized autobiography of a character based loosely on me, but looking into this whole history of crime, satanic murder, all of these crimes by church and state in Canada through this character, Samuel Wedge. And you can get those through Amazon.com and other sources.
That's something that really interests me, Kevin, because I've been looking at this and this Vatican cult, and more of it is coming together all the time. I won't go into details now because we're going to talk about what you've been up to, but that's very interesting. You bring Necropolis is exactly where this thing is heading, and was where it was going from the start. So they're desperate to keep that bit of it alive. Basically, this ritual sacrifice and this control system that's that the Vatican are now. They've changed their tactics quite a lot. And we've noticed that over the past couple of years with the things that you've reported and the recent incidents with the popes. I always thought that incident where the dove was released with the children
right
in Rome, and the dove was attacked by a crow and a seagull within a couple of seconds. So you got a land bird and a seabird attacking the Vatican's sacred bird. That was very symbolic, I think, and I think it was symbolic for them.
Well, yeah, and as a matter of fact, this weekend it's appropriate we're doing this interview now because this weekend, the February 21st and 22nd, is a traditional child killing date in Rome. It's the what's called the festivals of Terminalia and Feralia, where traditionally in Rome, over thousands of years, children were sacrificed as an offering to help the crops and as an offering to their ancestors. We know that last year on this date there was a child killed in the basement of the Jesuit church in Rome, the Church of San Lorenzo, and there was a Canadian cardinal and a Canadian politician, Denis Labelle, that were present at this event. We have that from eyewitnesses. Now, there are these dates of the year where there's definite child sacrifice going on. And again, this is from insiders and verified by, police, by Interpol, by others we've been working with.
It's very interesting that you're getting that information because people have been saying very similar things to me and their sources I believe to be very good. And the uncovering of this, I think, has to be done carefully because there is a tendency, especially on social media, to sensationalize this stuff so it becomes almost unbelievable to people. And right. I think a very sober and considered way of putting this stuff across with the background is really what's important, and it sounds like you're trying to do that. So this book, how long did it take you to write it?
Well, it's only been a few months in the making, actually. I got the idea from my father, who looked at this. If you remember Salman Rushdie in England, when he wrote the book, The Satanic Verses, and that, apparently the Ayatollah Khomeini put a contract out on him after that. He got a lot of publicity and over that. And he wrote a book called Joseph Anton, which was kind of a fictional character based on what he went through. My father said, why don't you do the same thing? I mean, essentially, Canadian church and state have done the same thing to you, Kevin. Why don't you write the same thing? So I kind of wrote it in a very inspired moment, realizing that we have to appeal on many different levels to people on this, not simply hitting them with the cold facts all the time, which you said, as you mentioned, can psychologically overwhelm people, with disbelief in that. I think once we realize that these crimes are right in the fabric of our society, and there's a lot of evidence to show to show that this is happening, then we can take the next step, which is to stop it.
That's absolutely right, and that does take the cooperation, as you said earlier, of the police, which is a big problem worldwide because the corruption within police is so huge, and the control system within the police to shut down anything like this is vast. And of course, most of these people at the high end of it are particularly compromised. So it does take real whistleblowers to come forward, and basically they can remain anonymous if they have the correct information. I mean, it would be very good to get people from the inside coming forward like they have been doing to you and to a certain extent with us. And I consider that you're very responsible with the way you put it out, and I don't think that's been the case. I think there's a tendency now to use this blanket word paedophile. It's thrown around almost as if it's normal, and it isn't normal, and it's almost like the normalize. It's a form of kind of overwhelming people, so that they're becoming so familiar with that term that it's not shocking them anymore. And
well, it's designed.
There's a problem. Yeah.
It's designed not to shock because the word pedophilia means friend of children.
Yes.
And it's more that neural programming to making you think, well, it's a relatively benign thing. It's like here in Canada, they always talk about residential school abuses. An abuse is a very benign term for rape, torture, and murder, and throwing children in ditches and burying them, sometimes even alive. They can't use those words. They have to use abuse. It just numbs people down mentally. It's the same thing with the word pedophilia. But what we rely on is many sources from the inside. Our critics, constantly carp at us saying, where's the evidence? Where's the court record? the reality is a lot of the court record for these proceedings where we've adjudicated this evidence, it has been up online for a number of years, for 2 years now. It's part of the fog the opposition creates around an issue because people unfortunately don't take the time to look at the evidence. They just they want a 3-minute blip on something. And so it's easy to assume, well, he's making it up rather than going and looking at the evidence, which is it's posted for people to see, including eyewitnesses who were at these Ninth Circle sacrificial killings. Policemen like Kel Gadban, an Ottawa policeman who helped us stop one of these ritual killings in Montreal, and then he was killed for it. I mean, all of this has been documented. So I just urge people listening to, do the work before you start criticizing.
Oh, that's right. There has to be a considered approach to this because this all blew up for you, and it's to an extent it's something that I've had to put up with, basically because people won't read and they won't rationalize things and look at things closely and properly. And of course, the opposition use that to their benefit at all times, because what we've got is neuro-linguistic programming doublespeak used by every public servant. People are shut down with Delphi technique at any public meetings. And then the Guardian are saying that 1,500 soldiers are going to be monitoring social media to control the narrative. They actually use that word, control the narrative. Now, it doesn't get any worse than that. If you're actually thinking that you're living in any kind of environment where your say is, or your opinion, or a general real consensus is being heard, it's just nonsense now. But conversely, those soldiers who are going to be employed to sit about on Facebook and social media all day, controlling the narrative and basically abusing citizens in their own country who aren't terrorists, who may have a contrary view to the government, which most people in this country actually have, they are being targeted by their own army. It couldn't get worse, really.
Well, often, it's not even our army anymore. It's Blackwater, private corporations like that working, outside any kind of public accountability. So that's one of the reasons we say we have every right to ignore these people, to stand away from their system of law and taxation. But, all of this, Mark, indicates what a crisis they're in. It's like, I love that quotation from one of the American generals who was surrounded by the Germans during the Battle of the Bulge in 1944. And his famous quote was, well, they've got us surrounded, the poor bastards. And, that's because he saw the bigger picture that, they might have been surrounded at that moment, but it was delaying their advance. And it meant in the long run, they were going to get, the Germans were going to be stopped. Similarly, right now, these are acts of desperation by the state, by the church, by the Vatican, others. They know they've been exposed. Their power is literally evaporating. And in that situation, they get all the more brutal to scare people because that's all they have left, fear.
That's exactly right. Have you got any theories about why that is and why it's happening at the present time?
You mean the loss of their power and all that?
Yeah, the loss of their assumed control. And it's almost like this deviant spiritual power that they believe they've been holding.
Right. Well, I think there's two levels of that to answer that. The first is kind of a geopolitical one. The power of the Western alliance is falling. China and the BRIC nations are the rising power in the world. The Vatican is jumping ship. They're putting a lot of their money into the East, into the BRIC banks, Russia, China, India bloc. And so, in England, the Western Bloc is kind of like the way England was after World War II. It was bankrupt. It had lost its imperial power, and so it had to create a big show. And that's kind of generally why the power of the West is declining. But at a spiritual level, wherever these elites operate, they have lost their substance. The first sense I've got of that is when I was in Rome in October 2009. I conducted a public exorcism and ceremony outside the Vatican. I was expecting to be very overwhelmed by standing in that place, knowing what it was. And I stood there, I shut my eyes, and I'll tell you, Mark, it felt like there was nothing there. It felt like there was a big hologram or an illusion. There was no substance to it. And I think that that's an accurate description. These elites have no substance. They have if you continue to surrender your moral substance through the crimes that they've committed for so many centuries, they eventually vanish. I mean, that's a reality that can't be denied, and so they have to be all the more, violent and oppressive and creating fear, because, like I say, that's their chief weapon left to them.
So, do you think that would mean that in this desperation, they're actually carrying out a lot more sacrifices than they used to?
Yeah, definitely. We've just in kind of a tab from some of the police agencies and other groups that work right off the radar screen in monitoring these people, including insiders who share information. And definitely it peaked in the last year, especially towards the end of 2014. And so, a lot of those, again, were based in Europe. In Holland and Belgium are hotspots for that, but so are places like Carnarvon Castle in Wales, Balmoral Castle, and of course many other places where Drangheta, the mafia syndicate, provides children for a lot of these crimes.
That's very interesting, Kevin. And it's good to share this knowledge because it does really give us the wider picture. And that's really what I think all this is about. We've all got good researchers, all have a piece of this puzzle. And putting it together to see the whole thing is really the most important thing, because then you become properly armed. If you have fragmented information, then you're not armed with the facts. And that's the danger with a lot of alternative media, because it means that, private corporations, the military industrial complex can control the narrative because there's so much disinformation out there anyway, or misinformation, people who are misinformed about things and give half-truths. So I think that really, it doesn't take that many committed people who are good researchers to bring this stuff out. And I would say that, over the years, I've always thought that you were one of those people because you're quite thorough and you've been very balanced and sober about the whole thing. What the opposition like is sensationalism so that they can undermine it. And I see a lot of this stuff going on. It is being ramped up. But when you've got the announcement the British Army are going to be doing this as well, it's almost like comedic now. It's utterly ridiculous.
Well, it is. It's kind of like when I go down to the United States. There was something published the other day that said that 60%, that's almost 2/3 of the American population, are living off 2% of the income. Like 2% of the wealth is held by 2/3 of the people. Where is all this wealth going? And yet you talk to your average American and they're focused on these red herring issues, like, attack Obama, attack liberals on their stand on abortion. They're all being diverted from the fact that they're being robbed blind. And, I think this is true about any issue. We're being distracted so we don't look at what's really oppressing all of us. And the way that we get around that is by becoming very humble and focus on the facts. What I noticed in the last number of weeks is the incredible number of people who keep attacking each other over the internet. And something is definitely provoking that. It's kind of like when you're in a meeting, somebody walks in and shouts something. You can get everybody agitated. It only takes one person to agitate a whole hall of people. Similarly with this, we have to step back from the internet and recover our senses and our common sense when we realize what we're up against.
No, that's definitely true. But I think that it brings back to the main point, which is if the information is good, then it can't really be diluted or compromised in any way, and it can't be subverted either, because if the information is good, then it really doesn't matter about a lot of this sort of diversion and attacks that are going on. I actually did a show on internet trolls last week, and I was never going to do that, but because of what's happened over the past couple of years, and I've actually been able to identify a group of people who work together, and I have empirical evidence that anybody can see on my website, and it's all there. I've traced them through Companies House, it's all on there. That sort of information is very useful, but this other kind of stupid. Yeah, the people who were meant to be on the same side falling into that trap and becoming hysterical, it is really of no use whatsoever. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's what's really interesting now is that it's I always use these attacks as a kind of reverse barometer. Whenever I'm getting close to something, these attacks begin, and definitely this whole proclamation of Canada really had the system worried in Canada and England because you know here's a case in point. We proved that church and state in Canada killed off more than 50,000 children. At the same time, not one person was ever brought to trial for those deaths. That the system is standing totally naked and exposed there. So what they have to do is keep distracting from the evidence and go after me. And so whenever anyone mentions residential schools now, they automatically think, oh, Kevin Annett. No, it's not about me. It's about children lying dead in the ground and the people who got away with it, who are still in power. That's the issue, and that's what we always have to keep coming back to, the hard evidence and who's really guilty.
That's absolutely right. I mean, just putting information out without any frills and bows on it and trying to sound over eloquent and full of yourself is about as good as it gets, in my opinion, because there's so many people whose egos get carried away with, and they love pontificating for hours. And a lot of this internet radio stuff, it's just it's just an ego fest with people kind of, they're not making enough points. It's the points of the information. It's almost like good journalism is about facts, editing, and being concise and very, very concentrated with the point you're trying to make. And because the education system has been so dumbed down, you've got a generation of people who call themselves journalists who do no research. They just follow PR documents that they're given. I think that we are in a time of deceit, and telling the truth is definitely quite a unique thing. To really do it and to research properly, because that's where this stuff is going to be exposed in true research and very sober analysis, and people standing firm, not just getting carried away on every single bandwagon that comes along. Yeah,
well, the unfortunate thing, one of the downsides of the internet is that it's created a whole culture that equates being with information. And it's not a matter of acquiring information anymore. We already know what the essential problems are. We can always acquire more. But just learning something in front of a computer screen does not constitute doing something. You have to then take that information out into the real world and use it to change things, like we've done now in Canada, or Canada, where we say we have no more allegiance to the system. We're creating new covenants, new common law arrangements, which do not operate through these criminal institutions anymore. People are doing that. I mean, and so information is only helpful if it's a springboard to something greater. And I think we often forget that, being glued to the screen.
That's very true. But putting together this bigger picture is what's important. And I think that getting good, concise information out is where it's at. We've just been over that point. So tell us about the new radio show.
Yeah, Radio Free Kanata. You can read a description. You go to bbsradio.com and then /Radio Free Kanata. So that's Kanata. Kanata is actually the word where Canada comes from. It's a Huron Indian word meaning our village. And Radio Free Kanata is going to be devoted to really being the voice of this new nation. Reports on the ground from people who are, bringing about the new republic, issuing stand-down orders to the police. And actually, and here's the exciting part of what's going on, they're actually reclaiming the land. There's groups of people around nullifying debt and taxation, nullifying mortgages, and simply occupying the land and buildings and saying, now this is, for example, the property of these churches that have been convicted of genocide are now public property. And people are going in and seizing these buildings. They're seizing the land, especially a lot of the native people have been doing these land reclamations anyway to hold on to their traditional territories. We're linking up with all these groups and saying, yeah, we are literally taking back the country now. And so Radio Free Canada is going to be a way to regularly hear about these things and also have guests on. As a matter of fact, for example, on March 8th, on our second show, we have Kevin Edwards from the Common Law Court of Wales, who's going to be coming on talking about, the similar developments in England. And we want to establish real links between England and Canada because we're operating under the same system historically. So that's every Sunday, 11 p.m. Greenwich time at Radio Free Canada. That's bbsradio.com/Radio Free Canada. And it's an hour long program. And again, if people want to be part of that and help, organize programs and that, you can write to us, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com.
That sounds interesting, Kevin. I'll be tuning into that. It's interesting you mentioned Wales there because several years ago we were involved in a so-called court case down in Wales, and that video has been watched hundreds of thousands of times. It's known as Free Man Standing in Court or Council's Courts and Comment, and I think a lot of this stuff is getting more sophisticated and moving on now. Yeah. It's the people who were sort of catching up with using this free man approach. It's grown quite a lot. But what I see now, which is very encouraging, is a lot of younger people who are getting hassled by the police and having these problems, getting stopped by the police. They are using a more sophisticated version of this free man idea, which is very, very interesting. And I think that it's a lot bigger than I believed it to be, because they're definitely, the interviews I've been doing recently, the police are now saying, "Oh, you're one of those people, are you?" And people go, "Well, what's someone who stands up for their rights and treats you as a public servant?" Yes, I'm one of those people.
Well, yeah, right. No, as a matter of fact, when police say that to us in Canada, we say, actually, you're one of these people too. You're one of the people. It's time for you to stand back from your oath of allegiance to the crown and take an oath of allegiance to the republic and to the people. Now, we actually are beginning to educate and deputize police here in Canada, and that's something people should do in England. And in fact, it's one of the things Kevin will be talking about, Kevin Edwards, on our show on March 8th, how they're going about doing that in a very sophisticated way. They really know their stuff in the Common Law Court of Wales. And the important thing here to realize is that it's already in our tradition. There's laws on the books in England establishing the Republic in 1649 and making it an act of treason to advocate for a monarchy. The Acts of Parliament that abolished the House of Lords and the monarchy in 1649, those are standing laws. It doesn't matter if they're nullified. They still are in the hearts and minds and in the legal tradition of England. So we are all standing on lawful territory. This is nothing, subversive. We're restoring, reclaiming the nations.
Yeah, there's a lot of occult stuff hidden in those statutes as well, and the statutes have been basically burned at certain periods of history. It's something I'm looking into at the moment. So really the whole thing becomes a real spider's web. But basically, it's all about this thing of assumed liability and original sin, which we've talked about before, which is now hopefully wearing a bit thin, because as everything is just a corporation, and the police are a corporation, we've got the military who are a corporation, as you were saying earlier. We've got, we've got the military-industrial complex, Halliburton. We've got Blackwater, which changed its name, didn't it? And also Kraft International, which supply, bespoke snipers, and it's just incredible that people actually still believe that we have sovereign nations, Yeah.
Well, historically, it's interesting. Whenever revolutions happen, you find the same phenomena right up to the very last day before the old regime falls. Everyone is walking around saying, things are never going to change. The king or whoever is going to be in power for another 1,000 years, whatever. And then it all collapses. And there's a palace coup, and the army and goes over, and that's it. The system's over. We're going through a very similar era right now, right? The stage in history where things are collapsing, and people have to keep their eye on the bigger prize here, and on, like Jesus once said in the Bible, you got to keep your eye on the horizon and look at the weather changes, because the evidence is right in front of our eyes, but our minds often betray us because of the way we've been conditioned. We can't see simple reality anymore.
No, that's absolutely true. And stripping away the layers of this deception is really what it's all about. So, in conclusion for today, Kevin, just let us know what you're up to. We've got the radio station. That's up and running now, is it?
Well, March 1st, Sunday, March 1st is the first program. It'll be every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern or 11 p.m. Greenwich time. Radio Free Canada, bbsradio.com. Now, the other things we're doing, of course, there's the whole aspect of the common law court movement, which is really spreading. I've been asked to come over in April to England again to work, doing a lot of the work on the continent, of course, to document these crimes of the Ninth Circle. We also are preparing the Pope, so-called Pope Francis, has been invited to speak to the U.S. Congress on September 24th. Again, this falls in the same period of time where the child sacrifices tend to spike. There'll be protests at the United Nations and the U.S. Congress in late September where Jorge Bergoglio will be speaking, an attempt to perform citizen arrest on him and really make it uncomfortable for him to appear in America. So all of that is, some of the stuff that's developing and even more. And, we'll certainly have a lot more to report about all that.
Well, that's great, because the important thing about this, I think, is that people go, common law courts, that's anarchy. Well, people have to remember this, that the courts are a private business and they work against the interests of the people. And what's in the public interest in a court of law is not the real public interest. It's the public interest first.
Sunday, March 1st. That's right. I look forward to talking to all of you then.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, Mark.
The circle of people who are running this business, and that's all it is. So
that's right.
When people go, you can't have these common law courts, and what's the proof? Really, the courts are run as a mafia anyway. We know that even on every single level, people go into court every day, and they basically, this occult nature of the whole thing is what this exposes, which I think is all to the good. So that's great, Kevin, and we'll definitely be tuning in 11 p.m. on Sunday. Thanks for joining us on Windows on the World. Remember, keep watching those, watching us, watching Windows on the World. We'll see you soon.